This is Permissionless Liberty.
Welcome to Permissionless Liberty. I'm Dan Sanchez with Adam Knott. Today I'm going to share an article I wrote called Liberty is Natural, Practical, and Divine. And in this essay, I try to reconcile three different strands of arguments for libertarianism. There's the natural rights philosophy, there's utilitarianism, and there's the religious case, and in my case, a Christian case for liberty. And there's often a debate about which is the best ethical framework for that case. And that's a big debate among libertarians. Natural rights versus utilitarianism, it was a big debate in the mid-20th century. So Murray Rothbard championed the natural rights case for liberty in 1982 in his book, The Ethics of Liberty. And also in his 1978 preface to a book, a collection of articles by Ludwig von Mises, he criticized Ludwig von Mises's utilitarianism, even though Ludwig von Mises was his mentor. And Mises wrote in Human Action in 1944 that the case for liberty that classical economists and Austrian economists made was based on social utility and had nothing to do with natural rights. For his case part, Henry Hazlitt, who was another student of Mises's, advocated what he called rule utilitarianism in his book, The Foundations of Morality, which was published in 1964. Now, personally, I subscribe to what I believe are mutually compatible versions of natural rights and utilitarianism. So, when Adam and I first met online on the Mises forums, that was a big debate that was going on between natural rights and utilitarianism. And at the time, I really was opposed to the natural rights perspective, like the natural law perspective, and really made the case for utilitarianism. But since then, I've come to I still think I believe in the same propositions that I would make against problems with natural rights arguments as Rothbard was putting forward, but now I think the word natural rights is actually useful and it actually does describe something that's true. So there are the Lockean rights, natural rights of self-ownership and private property. I always have believed in those rights, but I thought they had a utilitarian basis, not a human nature type basis. But now I believe that they are natural in the sense that such rights accord with our human nature. And since they accord with our human nature, that if we shape our conduct in accord with them, with these rights, that tends to yield the greatest utility for everyone involved. And utility according to the subjective preferences of everyone involved. So that's how I reconcile it. Like I don't believe that you can completely divorce natural rights from utility. You can't say okay, well, I don't care about utility. I care about what's right, and I can prove by argumentation what's right, through philosophy, and whether you think you'll get utility from accepting this or not, well, you've got to accept it anyway because you can't prove me wrong. Like I've never like been comfortable with that. Like, I still am not. I still don't think that's like persuasive or even makes much sense. But I can say I do believe that that you can say to someone that, okay, like if you want utility, like if you want, a society of prosperity and wealth and health and well-being and harmony, that that you should adopt an ethic and a norm and a system of justice that accords with human nature, and human nature is this way, and and is such that you get all those things if you um, respect life, liberty, and property, basically. So, what do you think of that, Adam?
I think that the topic you've chosen for today, Dan, is a great opportunity um, to see kind of the premise of, I guess, libertarian thinking over, since the time of Rothbard, let's say, I guess since the 1970s. And uh, I didn't want to jump in with kind of all my comments right away. But what I will say is that, as a precursor, is that the word utilitarianism to me is problematic because I believe that there is such a thing as individualistic or personal utility. So that means if somebody, all of these philosophies we're talking about, whether it's a theological, whether it's natural rights, whether it's utilitarianism, they're going to be expressed for practical purposes in writing. There's going to be a text presented to me to appraise, and what I'm going to be looking for are essentially two things. What does that text suggest that I do? And then what will happen or not happen to me if I do or don't do what the text suggests I do? So to me, it's extremely simple. So where I struggle with the libertarian framing of the issue, and where I take serious issue with the Rothbardian approach, is that utilitarianism, if we don't qualify it, is a collective concept, and I verified that with Grok before we went on tonight. And so, utilitarianism has to do with says an ethical theory that advocates for policies and actions that maximize overall happiness, meaning happiness of a group, well-being, or utility for the greatest number of people, often prioritizing collective good over individual rights, et cetera, et cetera. So utilitarianism, as that word is generally meant, is that when you say that word, you automatically switch over to an analysis of how my action will impact some sort of collective entity. And I think in your article that you wrote, one of the collective entities that we switch over to when we talk about utilitarianism is the economy, for example. We say, well, if Adam does all this, how will that impact the economy? And then we can show Adam, well, if you impact the economy in a bad way, let's say you create lots of inflation, or you create instability and block up the supply chains, here's what's going to happen to you, Adam. This will impact your standard of living. And then what happens is when we take the theological or the natural rights, when we go there, then I have the hope that those two philosophies are going to show me, well, what will actually happen to me directly? In other words, let's forget how I might impact the collective. And then somehow in the future, in 5 years, the economy might go down, but in the meantime, my investments might do really well. So I might actually do really great personally. So when we talk about how my actions or my ethical conduct influences me personally, we tend to switch over now to two different, and this is what Rothbard basically recommended in the Ethics of Liberty. He said, when we do the economy, we're going to do praxeology. When it comes to your personal conduct and how it potentially impacts you, we're not going to do that. We're going to switch over to natural rights. So what I'm trying to say is I don't agree with that framing, because I believe in the existence of something called personal utility, that it would be possible to show how the actions that I take impact me directly. Even if people believe that's not possible, that's what I would advocate. Even if someone would say, well, Adam, good try, but it's never been done, you're not going to be able to do that. So that's kind of my opening salvo into basically a fundamental disagreement with how libertarians frame the argument for me to conduct myself in a given way. They say, listen, Adam, here's the utilitarian thing tells you how you should act towards the economy. And then if you want to find out how to treat your next door neighbor, then we have these other two theories here, and they tell you how to do that. And I disagree with that framing.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that the most prominent libertarian or classical liberal advocates of utilitarianism in the modern day would agree with you too. That Ludwig von Mises, of course, he was a methodological individualist with ethics just as much as he was with the economy, with economics, and so is Hazlitt. And I think that really that sort of like more collectivist view of utilitarianism really kind of traces more back to like Jeremy Bentham and maybe John Stuart Mill, and it's this, yeah, and to say that like the greatest good for the greatest number, like there's no non-arbitrary way of determining that, because value is subjective and individual, and it's ordinal, and you can't add up ordinal rankings. There's no such thing as like utils that you could like add up for like how much pleasure or utility people on aggregate are getting. And so I agree that it's the only kind of utility that even makes sense is individual utility.
Dan, also, if I may just jump in real quick, as soon as I hear the collective version, I automatically envision, because it says the greatest happiness for the greatest number, so that I have to put myself in the position of like a dictator or a king, and then make these, like I say, move 20 million tons of potatoes over to Boise, move 50,000 tons of tomatoes over to Las Vegas. It puts yourself in the position of some sort of collective decision maker. And then if I reverse it, and we've discussed many times, I mean, for me, a big thing is coercion. So this person who's going to make this choice about the greatest happiness for the greatest number, he's going to, I guess, look at stuff like your income or your belongings or your access to medical care. And meanwhile, I'm saying, listen, dude, I'll take care of all that stuff. Why don't you just minimize my coercion? Well, is that person going to do that? No, they're looking at the greatest happiness. They're going to use some crude measuring tool. I mean, it's a joke. I mean, I can't even take it seriously. I'm not, of course, I have the benefit of 200 or 300 years of history. But as soon as I hear that phrase, I just draw a blank, because it's like, it's not worth pursuing mentally when it's just a dead end.
Yeah, it's like the conceit of knowledge, or the fatal conceit of Hayek,
Right.
or the pretense of knowledge, and it's the calculation problem and the knowledge problem, and the
As
the
if
math.
somebody can really decide and sit there and make these decisions for millions and billions of people and claim that those are going to make them happy. It just basically, as you said, Hayek he's saying the pretense of knowledge. You're not a social engineering doesn't work. You don't know what each person makes them happy. So and even if you did, how would you provide that? How are you going to provide free medical care to that person and provide no coercion to me?
Right. Right.
So you're going to have to say, well, free medical care to them is more important and makes the society happy. It's like, I don't know about that. Really? Is that really? I don't really agree with that. I think if you make me happy, I think I could probably have, being the humble person I am, I think I could make society much happier if you make me happy. So anyway, hopefully, yeah. So we're in agreement that that's a problem. The collective utility is problematic.
Yeah, but I think there is a sense in which you can be an individual utilitarian, in that, each, like what Mises would like to say, and Hazlitt seconded it in his Foundations of Morality, is that society is the most important means to all of our individual ends. And so there is, even though we have different interests, there is what Mises called a harmony of interests, in that that if we were isolated, and if we were at odds with people around us, then on an individual basis that would be really bad. And so that's why we have ethics. That's why we have norms. That's why we have like self-restraint and submitting to ethics and norms and rules and laws, because because even though we might in the short run get a lot out of robbing our neighbor, like we don't want them to be able to rob us. And so we want like a universal ethic, and we want to submit to that, and for others to submit to that. And then we kind of like internalize some of that in ethical codes that kind of become ends in and of themselves, as they become more and more habituated. Um, and so like in practice, we do care what tends to create more utility. Like, even though that there's no like non-arbitrary way of like calculating that, we can identify rules, and this is what Hazlitt called rule utilitarianism, that there are certain rules by which um, any individual one of us would be better off if everybody abided by that rule. And that's also a difference between what Hazlitt called act utilitarianism, because people like Benthamites might say like, okay, well, with any given act, we should just do whatever's good for the best for the greatest number. And you could, someone like Rothbard would rightly object that, okay, well, that just leaves the way open for central planning and interventionism, because like you never have like a hard and fast rule of like don't violate rights, because you say like, oh well, should we violate rights in this one case? Because if you can make a case that violating this person's rights may make him worse off, but it'll have all these like side effects and further effects on other people, that other people's utility would like outweigh his disutility. Like, first of all, again, there's no non-arbitrary way of determining that. But also, like, that's not what Hazlitt and Mises are talking about when they talk about utilitarianism. That they're not talking about what are the individual acts that will have the most utility, that will make people better off. What are the rules that if we adopt, people will be better off? And again, those rules are the rules that accord with human nature. And human nature is such that when we have you know rights to our person and property, and when we afford those same rights to everyone else, then we produce and we trade and we have gains from trade and we divide our labor and we have like the greater productivity from the division of labor, and we're all in it. We that leads to harmony and um and plenty. So so that is the norm that accords with our human nature, and therefore tends to yield, in that general sense, the most utility. Again, there's no way of like mathematizing it, but you can have a general sense of like, okay, Soviet Union versus America, like, which society is more prosperous.
The way I'm interpreting you, regardless of how you meant it, was that if you started out with a group of people who all had the same goal, let's just say the same end point or same goal, and each of them were acting in good faith. So let's just say, what does good faith mean? So it means no ulterior motives. If you have ulterior motives, put them on the table, write them down, and no dishonesty, no intellectual dishonesty. So under those conditions, let's say we all had the same goal, let's say to maximize prosperity of the country. And then we're going to have a debate how to do that. But the rules of the debate are no ulterior motives. So everybody who has their other motives, put them out there, and no lying, no deception, no strategy that involves non-transparency. And under those ideal conditions, unfortunately, very rare, then you could, I'll grant that you could make some headway, because you could, then reason would have a chance in a way. And I think when we talk about social issues, political issues, sometimes the issue of a monolithic culture comes up, like a Sweden or Japan or some places where the people all kind of think the same, and then there's a high level of trust, because there's possibly trust because if we all have the same goals, I don't have to worry so much that you're acting against my interests. And maybe in some societies, dishonesty is considered dishonorable, but not all, that's for sure. I mean, I don't think that's where we are today. I think it's considered one amongst many strategical employments, just a fact. So I interpret you to mean that reason can help us under those conditions. And if you made that point, I would say, okay, I'll grant that. But if I assume that those aren't the conditions and aren't going to be the conditions, then I believe that strategy now is inoperative, because, for example, as we know, I could say, well, the goal should be to maximize prosperity, and the other person will say, well, the goal is to equalize prosperity. Those are two totally opposed goals. And then as we know, people in politics, it's famously, there's all these different motives that people aren't making transparent. And definitely honesty is not highly valued in today's political climate. It's just not. And when I say dishonesty, I don't mean, I try to avoid using it. Each political party is accusing the others of being dishonest. So, but when I say it, I just mean something that's universal. That's something that we all do to some degree. We all do it, but it's quantitatively different. So it's like a human nature issue. Everybody knows what dishonesty is. Everybody misrepresents. I mean, there's white lies. Oh, beautiful decoration, Wanda. You did really great. Did you really mean that? But that's universally, it's a concealment of your true knowledge or belief to try to affect the external world of humans in a certain way, and utilizing that ability that we have to conceal, to influence. So when that becomes rampant, like today, when it's actually like just when there's no stop on it, we're in treacherous waters. And then the idea of setting a goal for society under these conditions where we don't have the same goal and where we don't agree on the rules, then I'm looking for now I view the challenge as different. It's like, okay, now my challenge is with these conditions, what do I do? So that's kind of I don't know. I'm not saying I know that where that gets us, but my head will not be on trying to solve the problem of how reason can help us when we have the same goals with no ulterior motives and no dishonesty. And how do we deal with the situation that we're in where there's opposed goals and lots of ulterior motives and lots of dishonesty? So then what do I do? So now I want guidance in that, or I want to help with that. I want to help with that problem because that's the problem that I face every day. And that's the people who are coming after me in the last few years. They were doing that. They weren't doing the other one. They weren't saying, Adam, what's our common goal? How can we all work? That's not what they were saying. They were saying, we're equalizing, and we're going to call it, but we're not going to call it that. And we're coming after you. And so, okay. So what political strategy is consistent with that? What action plan is consistent with that? Sorry for rambling on.
That's fine. It's an important point. I do think that a lot of people who are dishonest and who do have competing goals, that both the dishonesty and the competing goals are intermediate goals, and that they are intermediate towards higher goals like flourishing and prosperity, and even if it's not for the benefit of everyone, it's for the benefit of someone, that someone is going to, in their mind, like flourish and prosper because of that, and they're going to have more utility because of that. But it's true that some people just, there's no teaching them, that they're not willing to listen to any other perspective on how to get flourishing, and also they might be so like fixated on like equalizing wealth that becomes the ultimate goal, and nothing else matters. It's like, everyone can be equally miserable, and that's fine by them because they've fetishized equality in that sense. But I do think that most people do have higher goals of flourishing for somebody, whether it's flourishing for everybody or flourishing for their interest group, or flourishing for themselves individually. Even with dishonesty, that with the dishonesty, I mean, they're presuming that by lying they can get ahead, and that it won't, there won't be payback for that. There won't be any kind of comeuppance for that. But dishonesty, does tend to weave tangled webs. Like what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. And it's just bad for the soul. Like, it's bad for the way God made us, and so it gnaws at us on the inside. I mean, of course, there are sociopaths for whom that's not the case, but these are like, I think these are ultimately fringe cases. That I think that even when there's like this mass movement of people who are like ideologically possessed, I think that ideological possession, even if it's like, absolutist egalitarianism, that spell can be broken if they realize how much their ideology backfires and how much like the ideology that they're opposing will actually benefit the society at large and their interest group and them individually when it comes to flourishing and harmony and material welfare and security and things like that. So I do think that utility is an important thing to talk about, and I do think that human nature is an important thing to talk about, because then what tends to yield utility. And I think God is an important thing to talk about, because who gave us that nature? I mean, in the Declaration of Independence, it says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and those rights are the same rights that natural rights philosophers would call natural, which makes sense because God is who gave us our nature, according to which these rights have the best utility outcomes. So I think that all three perspectives are actually very complementary.
Yeah, I again, as a libertarian, I can't, I just do not want to contradict you with vigor, because I sympathize with the sentiments, which is that the sentiment is that reason, and it's kind of an old historical libertarian sentiment, that reason will eventually triumph, and that reason, and then we have faith that reason accords with liberty. So we're going to take a little bit of a leap of faith and trust that, one, reason will triumph. That's already one leap. And then leap number two is that the architecture of reason accords with liberty and not with the opposite, which is, in my opinion, collectivism, because I don't think I'm free if everything I do has to be vetted and got permission from a collective. So I don't think and we've discussed this before, I don't see human nature this way. I see it that when we're at some point in life, we make a decision whether we're individualistically oriented or collectively oriented, based on a fundamental divide in our consciousness, which is that I experience my own consciousness directly, and I experience other consciousnesses indirectly. Those experiences are reported to me. They don't have reality to me except for my act of empathy or sympathy, but they don't have fundamental reality to me. So there's a divide there. So now I have to make some choices based on that. I can't sit there and just like haphazardly not acknowledge that divide, because my impulse, uncontrolled or uncultured, is just to satisfy my own desires. And then when I'm 5 or 4 years old, somebody slaps me on the hand and says, "No, share your toys," or "No, don't hit Johnny," or "No, don't scream out loud in the church or at your dining room table," or "Don't throw your food," because I was happy doing those things. So now I'm taught, oh, okay, well, there's some negative things that happen to me when I act without respecting the other people who, in fairness to me, if their consciousness was half in my brain and I had half mine and half theirs, then maybe I wouldn't have done it, because it would have hurt me immediately, and then I would have stopped. Like if I hurt my own feelings and my feelings were their feelings, then I would stop doing it. But that's not how it works. Their feelings are over there, and I didn't experience the hurt that I caused. So I was going to keep doing it. So culture taught me. Anyway, with that, that's a whole nother discussion. But so I believe my political beliefs are that there are collectivists, people who are collective oriented, and that there are people who are individual or individualistically oriented, and that's a fundamental choice you have to make. And of course, we could say, well, you could do it on a case by case basis. But I think I kind of mentioned before, well, that's fine if we're just choosing, like the collective wants to have tacos tonight and I want to have Chinese food. Okay, well, I'll bow to the collective. There's 10 people and they all want to have tacos, so I go for tacos. That's minor stuff. But then the next one's going to be 10 people want to get an injection and make me get it, and I don't want to get it. That's more important. So now I'm tested on my collectivism, because by collectivism, I should be getting it. Or my individualism, I am going to stand against the collective and say, no, I don't care how many people you line up, and I don't care what your reasoning is, I'm not doing that. So I believe that what we're facing in our political environment is committed collectivists and confused right of the aisle, because I think that on the right of the aisle, we pick and choose. We pick collectivism when it's nationalism, or we pick these groups, but then we also try to couple it with freedom. So I want to be in America, but I want to be free. So I want to have a collective and I want to have an individualistic part. And I think we do that on the right side of the aisle. We're confused. And the other side of the aisle is not confused. They're consistent. So as I simplistically tried to say before, on our side it's 50-50, on the other side is 100. So over time, that has to go in one direction. So and I'm not sure where I'm going with this. I already lost my what got me into it. So now I'm going to tail off, and I'm back to you, Dan.
That's fine. Yeah. So you were talking about collectivism and individualism, and I think there are lots of different ways of defining those terms. Like, part of it is just like an error in reasoning. Like when, if you are a methodological collectivist versus a methodological individualist. So if you were to try to act as if there was a non-arbitrary way of adding up utility of a collective, that that's just false. Like that's just like wrong. And then there is also like the collectivist notion that there is such thing as like a collective will, like as Rousseau would have had us believe, or that there is this like entity called the collective that we must revere and bow down, when really it's just several individuals interacting and cooperating. But apart from the action of the individuals, like the collective is non-existent. But collectivists, gain a lot of power by convincing people that there is sort of like this entity called the collective that they can like worship like a false idol. And so that there are just errors in understanding reality that can be called collectivism. But then it's interesting how you characterize collectivism as, for example, not acting out in a restaurant because it would offend other people. And I think that is just, that's not really, if that is collectivism, then we could put names on anything. But if that is what you call collectivism, in the sense of not being so individualistic that you pay no regard to other individuals, like in a culture, and you might call a culture a collective, or you might call a society a collective. And as long as you don't think erroneously about that, then that's fine. As long as you don't think that, you know, that it is this monolithic thing that acts and wills, but that it is an interplay of people who individually choose to adopt like common norms, then that's fine. Like if you want to call that a collective. But insofar as that's what you call a collective, then I don't see anything wrong with collectivism in like adopting a common norm, like not acting out in a restaurant because you don't want to disturb other patrons in that restaurant, because it's like it's adopting a norm, an ethic that benefits you too, because then other people, when you're trying to have a quiet meal, then they're not playing like they're not like talking on their speakerphone like at maximum volume, and so that you're not disturbed in that case. And I mean, and it goes back to what you were saying about sort of like homogeneity in certain cultures, is that like we like to have a shared culture with our neighbors and our people around us, because we it can be a good culture, like it can be such that people are just like more peaceful and happy and able to think clearly because people aren't disturbing each other at restaurants, and they're not being too loud. And also just because it's predictable, that we like to have a certain amount of predictability in our lives. We don't want things to be like constantly unpredictable, where you like walk up to someone and you don't know how they're going to treat you, and you walk into a restaurant and you don't know how people are going to act. Like you and for people who like rowdy restaurants, like they want their predictability too. So it's like part of the virtue of a shared culture is just by the fact that it's shared, so that there's a certain degree of predictability. And so in that regard, like defined in that way, I think everyone is both collectivistic and individualistic, because also we don't like, we're never completely happy with all the norms of the society that we're in. We're all rebels to some extent, and that's how norms change, is that certain people are rebels against the norms, and then other people emulate them, and that kind of revolutionizes the norms, and then that becomes a new norm. And hopefully like that evolution is towards better norms. But we're all like individualistic in the sense that like there are some norms we push up against, and we're all collectivist in that there's some norms that we like. And so I in that regard, I don't really, and I don't really see it as this like stark divide between an individualist camp and a collectivist camp, because I think we all are both to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree that we're all both. So the idea where somebody has to be more, hopefully somebody's more quiet in a restaurant, or let's say in a movie theater. My favorite one is the cellophane candy. It goes on and on for 2 or 3 minutes straight. But I've been told by my wife on a number of occasions that I'm being too loud in a restaurant, because I have my little glass of wine and I'm excited about my philosophy and I'm talking. So I guess my view of collectivism is it's the priority of the other consciousness over your own interest or your own consciousness. So you submit the concerns of the other consciousness to yours. So in the example of the restaurant, if everybody was going to be happy, just assuming regardless of what I did, then I would just talk at whatever volume I wanted to talk at. And I would do whatever I want. But I've learned from experience that that's not the case, that other people won't be happy. And if I reverse it, the same thing has happened as the person at the other table. If it weren't for the feelings and the sentiments of everybody else in that restaurant, why not just do whatever you want at the table? But that's not what the situation. The situation is if you do whatever you want, the other people are going to be unhappy. But my only 2 cents into to try to make sense of what you're saying back to me about it is that as I tried to establish when we started talking about libertarianism, my specific political concern is not collectivism in general. When I'm at a restaurant and I want the people at the next table not to be screaming at the top of their lungs, or collectivism when I'm walking on the sidewalk and the people have to decide to walk to the side so they don't hit each other, but specifically legislated violence or legislated coercion. Now, all of a sudden, collectivism has, in a sense, life or death consequences. So now we're talking about things that it's not just what my fellow citizens want me to do, and this is no longer what's it called when it's the same on both sides, where it's not a case where in the restaurant we both have the same thing. If you be quiet, I'll be quiet, and we'll have a good time. In the movie theater, it's the same way. You don't do the cellophane, and I won't be talking to my wife in your ear all night during the movie, and we'll all make this work. But the government thing's one way. They're not saying, well, Adam, we'll coerce you here, and return you coerce us there. So you coerce us where you need to be, to get it the way you want, and we'll coerce you where we need to go, and it's all going to be fair. That's not what we have. So again, so I am a collectivist. So it's like you've heard people say that they're a voluntary socialist, and maybe in a funny way, there is such a thing. In other words, I don't always give money to the most deserving. I give money to who, in a sense, who I judge that I want to give it to for whatever reason I want to. And I don't have a strict scale of what somebody has to achieve in order for me to give them money. So if there is such a thing as voluntary socialism, I'm not against it. But but the part of socialism that I'm against is when you have a legislation with coercion. Now it's changed. Now the universal thing that we all do has become a monster of a different sort. And so I do agree with you that we are all, in my sense that I use it, we're all collectivists, but I'm for voluntary collectivism, not for ones that I'm forced to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I wanted to say a bit more about the religious aspect of my article, or the religious section of my article. So you mentioned reason earlier, and I make the point that the gift of reason, that the kind of reason that only humans are gifted with and that animals don't have, we can use that reason to discover truths about human nature, and infer from those truths rights that will benefit, that are the best for us. And that's exactly what philosophers like John Locke with his 2 treatises of government, and Murray Rothbard in his Ethics of Liberty did. We can also use reason to discover economic truths, like Adam Smith did, and like Ludwig von Mises did, and that also has to do with human nature, because Mises established that all of economics is inferred from an understanding of human action and what what action is and what action actually means. And so that's why the laws of economics are immutable. And again, human action is part of our human nature. It's inherent in us, and it's God-given, and as is creation altogether. That this world of creation, however it was, in the Garden of Eden, is a world of scarcity now, and scarcity is a law of nature in our world, and economics sheds light on how scarcity is best alleviated. And basically, scarcity is best alleviated in a society in which rights are protected, because it's in those situations that production happens, that trade happens, that the division of labor happens, that prices form, that that economic calculation happens, and we have a market economy in a global division of labor where we have like more prosperity than any civilization before. And so that's all stems from an understanding of our own nature and the nature of the world around us. And so and the flip side is true too, that if you violate rights, in a sense it is flouting God's laws of nature and laws of reality. That if you violate rights and then think that you can you know create a price control, and think that you can make people in general more prosperous with that, well, that's defying an economic law that will have bad ramifications, just as if you tried to defy the law of gravity. And so I think that that's just by way of elaborating on how talking about God, which Leonard Read did in I Pencil, and Frederick Bastiat did in Economic Harmonies, is an important way of understanding the situation in terms of human nature and in terms of human utility.
When you speak about rights, or that we're endowed with rights, let's say by our Creator, I thought we really had a good one a few weeks ago when we were talking about, or I thought it was good. So that this idea of category equality. So everybody who's human can reason, but that doesn't mean everybody can reason as well. To me, that's just an obvious fact of nature, if you want, or the human condition. So I will grant that everybody is. So when we say humanity, where's your humanity? You don't empathize with the fellow humans, and I feel that I do. I feel as a human being, I empathize with the fact that there's 8 billion other human beings who have category equality to me. They have happiness and sadness, dreams and hopes, and devastations and setbacks, and all of, and as another human condition, they're situated in certain circumstances that are either great or not great. So we're categorically equal, and all of us can suffer bad situations. All of us can enjoy good situations. So we're categorically equal. And I think where the other side of the aisle goes wrong is they want quantitative equality, which I totally disagree with. I want to coin another term that I just came up with during our discussion, and it was the idea of we're talking about collectivists, and the term that I want to introduce is called observational collectivism. So what that would mean would be, if I'm a collectivist, and I mean this in the political sense, not in the restaurants and in the movie theaters and on the sidewalks. I mean this in the political sense, that observational collectivism would mean something like, it pains me every time in a group when I observe out there disparities, and that not just observing them in space, but also if I imagine them. So if I think of, this one group is being persecuted, and there's this other group who's persecuting somebody, that's primary in my mind. So to me, observational collectivism, if there was such a thing, just means that every time when I look out to society or imagine society, I focus on I observe disparity, and I don't accept it or want to rectify it. That's definitely a thing. And I know that I'm definitely not that, because I do sometimes. I'm sure we can all think of social situations where we see somebody who's struggling and we want to help them. But I'm as a rule, I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea that if I'm in the hospital suffering some, very scary situation, there's 700,999,000,000 people who aren't suffering that, and good for them. They're out there. There's people in restaurants. How dare they be in a restaurant being too loud while I'm in the hospital suffering, in a major emergency, and vice versa. Or people who are born in a poor country versus a wealthy country. As a human being, I totally accept that as part of the human condition, and the biological condition. So I don't see it as abnormal. So therefore, my essence as a political being is not to try to solve that. I view it as optional, and I view it as perhaps even praiseworthy sometimes, or maybe most of the time. But I don't view it as as justification for coercing me. So anyway, that's the one term I wanted to just throw out there. And then my last comment was on this idea that through reason, as you were saying, let's say don't violate rights. And I think what you did there, again, was kind of where I take a little issue with libertarianism. It's not personally, but it's just that the idea was, if you violate rights, it will harm this collective thing, and you have an interest in that collective thing. So a great example is what's going on the West Coast of the United States is the westernmost states on the coastline are all highly collectivistic or communistic, meaning they're all interested in increasing the amount of laws and equalizing society. And therefore, a lot of people have to flee from that because they feel persecuted. And so your argument from rights is, well, if you violate their rights, then there's just going to be an overall, let's say, an overall negative happening in those states. They're going to lose some economic productivity or whatever. So the harm they're going to cause to each individual has to free is direct harm to that person. But on the opposite side, they're only going to suffer 1/40,000,000th of a penalty, because the whole thing's just going to go down. For each person they kick out, the economic, let's say, activity of California is going to go down by 0.00001%, and that's the penalty you get from violating that person's rights. So before I leave this, I want to give 4 examples. So if I walk outside to the sidewalk, then there's a consequence that comes with that. I have to leave my apartment. It's a very plain consequence that comes if I go down to the sidewalk. I have to leave my apartment. You may say, well, that's not very painful, but I have to make that decision because there may be a reason why I want to stay in my apartment. If I so the utility, in the way I mean it, if somebody says, well, wash your hands for these viruses or these bacteria, if you don't do that, here's the kind of ailment that could happen to you. So there's a utility in that action. Think of a child who's scared of ghosts in their closet and they're terrified. So it's a real physical ailment. They can't go to sleep. So there's a fix for that. But the utilitarian fix to show that there's no ghost or to keep a light on in their closet has an actual benefit to the person. Or, for example, the utility of calories. Let's say I'm going to tell you that if you eat these 2 ice cream floats or these 2 banana splits, it's going to be 2,000 calories, and here's what's going to happen to you. Or if you exercise, you're going to burn this amount of calories. So here, what I'm discussing is different actions that we can take, and there's an actual demonstrated utility or disutility that we can show to the person who does the action. So if I violate somebody's rights, or if I punch somebody, what libertarian theory struggles to demonstrate is what is the disutility to the person who does the aggressive act directly, not roundabout through a collective. So they say, well, Adam, that if you hurt that person, they may call the police as long as you don't hurt them too bad. And now you have 20 minutes to get out of there. Or, so it goes to redounds back to the collective, and then it might hurt me depending on how skillful I am at averting the thing. So in libertarian social philosophy, we have not been able to demonstrate that our bad conduct or our conduct that you libertarians don't want has any effect on the individual person. And that's one reason why people continue to conduct themselves that way, because they don't see a negative other than the roundabout negativity that has to come back through a collective mechanism, at which case it gets way watered down. I mean, what is Fauci's, I hate to beat poor Fauci up. What happened to him personally from what he did to me personally? Right now, it's basically nothing. I mean, maybe he has a guilty conscience. I hope he does. But basically, what happened was he was able to actually impact me directly. And then for the retribution, or for the second part of that action, went to a collective, which is the United States government. And he's been insulated by that, which is hard to believe, actually. But for different reasons that we could discuss for a long time, he's been insulated. So there's been no second part that redounds to that goes to him. So as libertarians, we've tried different theories about, well, what's the consequence to unethical action or for aggression, coercion? It's always a collective mechanism. We tell the collective, and the collective is where we're hoping to get retribution for the individual unethical action. We haven't been able to demonstrate if there's anything that happens to the individual. We could say, well, Adam, if you do this, here's what's going to happen to you personally right now when you do it. We don't believe there is such a thing. Therefore, we don't look for it. So if we did believe there was such a thing, we would look for it. We don't believe there's such a thing. And I know we don't believe there's such a thing because whenever we talk about unethical action, we switch over to either collective utilitarianism, or we switch over to rights violation or theological transgressions, punishment in the afterlife, punishment by falling short of the ethical ideal, but no demonstrable punishment in the same way that if I don't wash my hands, I might get a disease, or if I eat the banana split, I'm going to gain weight. There's nothing demonstrable that happens to me if I do an unethical activity. And therefore, libertarian theory has failed in the sense that it hasn't shown the individual concretely why they should be moral or not try to harm other people.
I don't really see it that way. I mean, if someone were to attack you, and then like you mentioned conscience, that's one thing that I think another aspect of our human nature is our conscience. Like even aside from sort of moral norms that emerge, that just our heart cries out against manifest wrong, and so there's that, and then there's also self-defense. Like if you were to punch back at the person who attacked you, I don't think that's collectivist. That's just a different individual enforcing his or her own rights and delivering justice to the criminal. And and like Bastiat said, that the law is basically just self-defense. He calls it self-defense organized, but that's still individuals. Like if instead of you defending yourself, you went to an individual officer of some like security agency or even some government agency, that's still an individual, and that individual might, and an individual judge, and the individual cop, and they might work together to make sure that that person provides you with restitution. I don't think that things have to be sort of egoistic. I think there's a difference between egoism and individualism, because like, yeah, I mean, even within the ego, even within the self, there is conscience, and there is God, but just because it might be other individuals who are imposing consequences that leads the person, that incentivizes the person to not commit crimes, I don't think that's collectivism.
Maybe if I would just slightly rephrase it, let me rephrase it this way. When we switch over to, let's say, collective utilitarianism, and say, if you do this, let's say you get hold of a money printer and you start printing up the money. So that's happened in recent history. By economic law, here's what's going to happen. Whether you want the inflation to happen or not, maybe you want to do it to hurt your country or hurt some individuals who have investments or inflation incentive. But by economic law, here's what's going to happen. Not 100%, but almost every time. So, and then in physical reality, we have physical laws. If you go down the sidewalk, is there anything you're going to have to give up? Yeah, you have to agree to leave your apartment. So you have to make a choice here. There's trade-offs, and you can't escape that in a way. So what I'm talking about is as a scientific matter, is there anything scientific spirited? I don't want to get into natural science, but I mean in the scientific spirit, meaning, is there any kind of law of human nature or law of physical nature that attaches to our conduct towards other people? So yes, if someone confronts me and tries to hurt me, I could punch them, but that's uncertain. I might, but maybe they'll have a gun with them, and then maybe I'll be prevented from hurting them back. So that's totally, if I commit a crime, I may be clever enough to avoid the penalty. Many criminals are. So those things that are uncertain, that what we call empirical, may or may not happen to you if you do X. That's not what I'm talking about then. So what I'm talking about when I say that the libertarian social theory has, let's not use a word that's inflammatory, failed, and let's not use this, has not been able to arrive at a law-like connection between conduct and consequence to the person who performs the conduct. Libertarians do not believe there is any such thing. And I know that indirectly, because when they say, Adam, if you do this conduct, when they show what will happen, I know they're not telling me I can see what they're saying is that there's nothing necessarily that's bad that's going to happen to me. So if I'm the governor of California and I say everybody who owns over $2 million needs to pay half of your income in taxes, and then a whole bunch of people move out of the state. And then the economy of California was going to grow at 5%, but now it's only growing at 1%. And the governor says, "Oh, that's okay with me." So nothing bad happened to him when he did something quote unquote bad to other people. We know of no law of human nature that if I do something bad to someone, that something bad will happen. Now, our ethics have tried to show us that. I mean, religion, I think, tries to say, if you don't behave, here's what might happen to you. And the government tries to be as a stand-in for that. And then I think libertarian rights theory, there's no demonstration of what will happen to me if I violate somebody's rights. What they want to do is a libertarian wants to take the ethics of liberty and build a constitution based on that. And then say, Adam, if you violate somebody's rights or property, we have this text. We all in this community agree on this text. If you want to be in this community, here's what's going to happen to you if you do these bad things. So again, those are all human-made responses, but those are not what I'm talking about. There's no, just like when we do virology, and we say, well, if you do this by law of nature, there's these little microbes or whatever, and they get or when we do physics, there is no known consequence to human behaviors, so that we could say to somebody, yeah, you have the option to hurt that person, but have you considered this? And that we've discovered a law that you didn't know about because we weren't advanced enough, because we're only in 1950 or 1970, and we've discovered a law of human nature, and we want to show you how that works. So, you still could hurt somebody tomorrow, even with this law. Just like with tomorrow, I can still not wash my hands for virus or bacteria tomorrow. And also, I could decide never to return to my apartment tomorrow. The laws don't tell you what to do. They show you the trade-offs. We have no law in libertarian philosophy that shows you a trade-off from hurting someone else. There is no such thing. It's all human-made retribution.
But it's not completely and arbitrarily human-made. Again, it's based on human nature. That, like, what Locke's work and Rothbard's and Mises's, when talking about what causes humans to flourish, it's an understanding that's all rooted in human nature. And it's true that it's not like an iron law, like the Newtonian laws of physics. Well, with economics, they are exact laws, but it doesn't mean that in any given instance of violating someone's rights that they're never going to get at least some sort of short-term benefit. But there are these things of nature, that truths of nature, that we are all, that we all have this God-given human nature that includes reason and includes the ability to have a moral code and an ability to behave morally, and because of that, we have an ability, like Adam Smith said, that nobody ever saw two dogs trade bones for each other, because they don't have the reasoning capacity to do that, to say that, okay, this was mine, but now it's yours because what was yours is now mine. And if I see that bone lying around later, I'm not going to just take it for myself, because I recognize that that's yours because of this trade that I had. Like that we have these capacities, and because of that, we are able to form these relationships with each other that are based on these kinds of moral codes. And so, and some of those relationships are really beneficial to us individually. We can't make those like I can't make that relationship with my dog here. Like, even if I tried to, like, grant her rights, like, it wouldn't even make sense. Like, it wouldn't improve the output of our relationship. But that's not the case with human beings. And like, and also because of human nature, you can know things like, FAFO, like F around and find out, is that people, don't like to be like attacked and mugged, and that if you do that to someone, they might fight back. They might just avoid you from then on and not have any kind of relationship. And trading is really beneficial to everyone. And then if through trade people can divide their labor and cooperate economically, and there are such laws of reality as the law of comparative advantage, which shows that that people always benefit materially when they divide their labor, even if what someone they're dividing their labor with is like inferior at all other realms of production. It still makes sense to divide your labor with them so that you can focus on your comparative advantage. And so like Mises called that the law of association, is because like the recognition of the greater productivity of the division of labor is what motivates people to have lasting social, permanent social bonds. And so I think that you're selling Mises and Rothbard short when you say that, oh, well, you're just writing this constitution and just saying like, well, if you don't agree with it, then we're going to put you in jail. And that's why, like you should obey it. And but it's not as arbitrary as that. It's rooted in the fact that because of these laws of human nature and laws of economics and laws of reality, that that these are laws that would that would maximize utility in a non-mathematical sense for everyone who obeys them.
Well, I guess I'm pretty sure how Mises would approach this is that when we're talking about something that somebody has the option to do or not do, so that is apparently that people have the option to just totally ignore libertarian rights theory and teachings of theology, and also historical lessons like communism. So they have the option to choose either way, regardless of. I'm in favor of your arguments and all libertarian arguments that show the beauty of, if you follow kind of what we're saying, how beautiful life could be. Because you describe all these relationships that we can have if we behave morally. And my point in bringing the text up, like our Ethics of Liberty or the Bible, is not to emphasize their randomness or their unimportance. Is that to emphasize the point that, as I am trying to argue, that those are stand-ins, placeholders, until such a time as reason could show somebody why they shouldn't be communist, opposed to the argument from the economy, as opposed to the argument from a collective degradation. Because what we're saying here as libertarians, we're saying, listen, if people act in this one way, there's going to be social degradation. There's going to be, there's going to be more violence. There's going to be lowering standards of living. There's going to be less trust. There's going to be all these different things in society in general, and you're going to have to live in that. That's your penalty for supporting that system. So what I'm saying is that our proposed solutions as libertarians has been to propound or advocate a moral code, which at its very, if it didn't get voluntary, just totally voluntary allegiance, would, as a secondary, I guess, second best, be codified as a legal thing. If you steal from Adam, if you violate Adam's rights in any ways that are in this text, we have a constitution now, here's what's going to happen to you. And to me, that's a placeholder for a scientific demonstration to an individual why they should abstain from certain things, which science, when science is established, shows them why they shouldn't do certain things. So, for example, I'm presently on a diet for the last 2 years, a diet for certain calorie. We have the fats, we have proteins, we have sugars, and we have carbs. You're supposed to lower some, and some you have more of, some you have less of. And it's not because anybody coerced me into doing it. It's because science, at least to my satisfaction, demonstrated to me that if I increase this over here and decrease this over here, that I will have a benefit will accrue to me. It's basically this physical science has shown me, to my satisfaction, that eating the certain kind of diet was not in my best interest, so I changed my diet. It's not easy to do because I like ice cream a lot, and bread. Those are two of my favorite things, cookies. And what I think, I'm not trying to say that the things that are protecting me now, the constitutions that are protecting me now, and the constitutions that you may be proposing, Dan, based on pure libertarian ethics, I would gladly take those in favor of the Soviet Union Constitution of 1922. But what I'm just claiming as a fact, that I think I could, after strenuous argument over long periods of time, establish that we as libertarians do not have a theory of how an individual is impacted by the conduct that they choose. What we're saying to them is, if you do this conduct, it's to the detriment of society, and your penalty is the increment of that accrues to you. So, Adam, if you don't act properly, you're going to degrade society. And now, don't blame us when you go out there and society's a little bit more violent each year, because you are contributing to that. But if you're artful in avoiding all that, well, then you're free, because maybe you're a bad person, but you're able to be in a certain high rise with better security. And maybe nothing bad ever happens to you. Maybe you get lucky and your investments skyrocket, but you're a terrible person and you're doing all these bad things to people. We don't know of anything that happens to you if you act contrary to libertarian ethics, other than the uncertain benefit things that accrue from society that might come to get you, but nothing personally will happen to you. So there's definitely a hole there. To me, it's I'm happy to have a whole thing on that if you thought it'd be helpful, or unless it's just arguing back and forth.
So I don't think it's about the code, like the legal code, for one thing. That, like, what's preventing me from murdering my neighbor is not because I know that somewhere in some law book it says some version of thou shalt not murder, and that there's like penalties that that go along with that. Like, it's because, like, my soul, like, recoils at the very notion, and that's something that even, like, children can understand. Like children, um very early on develop an ethos of don't hurt people and don't take people's stuff, and it's not because they know it's written down somewhere and that they'll get um maybe at some point it's because
but Dan, I think I agree with you. I mean, I think why we don't murder somebody, that's maybe right. I mean, if you're going to say, well, Adam, I don't agree because here's why we don't murder people, but that's not really the question. The question is, why aren't you a communist? Because you don't have to murder somebody to be a communist. All you have to do is support the enslavement of a population, basically, for purposes of whatever the communist purposes are. If they don't want to use the word equalization, whatever it is, however they want to phrase it, it has a certain meaning. It means that the government gets really big, individual choice gets really small. So, but if we were in communism 3 years ago, I would be injected with a vaccine, and I wouldn't be able to speak on social media right now to you about communism being bad. So that was what communism. So the question isn't why. The question is why there is no proof, there is no law of human nature that shows, well, if I could be a communist or I can be a capitalist, let's say. What happens to me if I choose either one? Oh, well, the economy does this under each one, and you'll have to live in that. That's your penalty. That's it. That's all we have. We don't have, well, if you're a communist, here's your mental life that's going to be. And if you're a capitalist, here's what your mental life's going to be. And that's going to impact you directly. Or your body's going to shrivel up. If you vote if you're a communist, your body's going to, one of your arms is going to get paralyzed. If you're a capitalist, one of your arms is going to go above your head and stay there and get stuck. There is
whenever it's a question of supporting one social system over another, it's always only an increment either way, for bad or good. It's so it's like whether you pay for being a communist, like, yeah, your punishment is only in the sense that it leads to this kind of society, and then you have to live in that society, and so the increment redounds to you. Well, so does the benefit. Like, if you think that there's a benefit to supporting communism, that's only an increment too. And so, like, it's never a completely sort of like instant feedback, instant karma type thing when you're talking about social things. It is when you're talking about, like, your own life and what you do to yourself and your diet and your neighbors and your friends and how you treat people there. Like, that's just like instant like karma, so to speak. But I think by nature, what social system you choose to support, that there's always going to be, not that kind of like instant feedback that you seem to be looking for. But I don't think there needs to be. Like, I think that people do support or oppose social systems because they think that it will redound, the increment will redound to them in good versus bad. And so in terms of selling and opposing social systems, it's just a matter of demonstrating which one actually will redound to the good.
Well, yeah, I think that's where we disagree. And it's not a criticism of you. I do see it. I'll give you an anecdotal idea of where I'm going. Is that the other night I was thinking about a transaction that I had a few months ago where I feel that I was cheated. Whether the person feels that they didn't do anything wrong or not, whatever, but I felt cheated by that person. And it was a significant amount of money, something that I could pursue through like a small claims court if I really wanted to. So I was laying in bed and I started thinking about the scenario of what I would have to endure mentally, because as soon as I started thinking about it, I got very unhappy. I started to get very kind of livid. And I knew what was happening. I knew that I was having certain types of thoughts, and the thoughts themselves were making me unhappy, regardless of what the world was going through, regardless of what that person was doing at that very moment. I was having certain thoughts. So being a person who's trained in social theory and the way that what you're thinking and can impact your happiness, I knew I had to choose. If I'm going to go down this path, I'm not going to be happy, but yeah, I might be able to get some of my money back, but I'm not going to be happy. So I had to choose, do I want to relinquish a large sum of money, or do I want to choose my happiness? And I was fortunate enough to be able to say, to heck with this, I'm not going to do this. So I dropped it, and I never gave it another thought. And therefore, I was much happier than I was about to be if I chose to pursue it. So I totally believe that I know for a fact, for example, when I watch people out in the political world, I see the political battles they're having in their mind with other people. It's called interpersonal conflict that they have. And for example, a great example is Hillary Clinton. In my mind, now I'm smart enough to know that I can't say for certain what is in her mind and how she's experiencing life. I interpret Hillary Clinton as a person who's extremely unhappy because she's in her mental life, she's always involved in interpersonal combat. That's how I interpret her. I am not always involved in that. I don't want to be involved in that. The way I do it is it's a technique, which is that, and I've written about it. So there's a technique in which you can get by in life and minimize that towards the goal of your own personal happiness. So there is a chance that there's a law of that. There's a chance that there's a way that works, that the political philosophy you choose may advise you on how to approach that subject, whether you're involved in interpersonal, for example, Trump derangement syndrome, which is a tongue-in-cheek, a real medical condition. It means that whenever somebody starts thinking about Trump, they get really mad. I've actually known people, let's say 15 years ago, I had a close personal friend that if somebody said something bad about Obama, that person turned visibly red. Visibly red. I know you may know people like that. You can say whatever you want about whatever political philosopher, and if I find myself starting to get mad, I'll say, Adam, what are you doing? Just so there's a tech that, but some philosophies are immune. They don't think that there's anything. They don't realize that there are actual thoughts you have to do certain things. So I think to be a communist, you have to have certain thoughts, and you have to have certain angers that anger you constantly to be a communist. I believe that. And I don't have those. And I don't have those against communists. I don't do it that way. That's not the way, because I'm not planning to get my goals through interpersonal conflict. I'm not planning to obtain my envisioned future by having a battle with anybody. So I'm not preparing for that battle, and I'm not living those battles in my head. So I feel that I'm trying to make my political philosophy consistent with what would make me happy, and try to achieve a goal of freedom that is also the goal of happiness in one coherent philosophy. And I don't think that anybody very many people actually believe, well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. Maybe people do believe that in their own way. But I think it's actually demonstrable how your thoughts influence your personal happiness. And to commit a crime, I don't think it's easy to do without certain thoughts. I mean, if you start planning a crime, those aren't thoughts I want to have. So I don't have them. And so I don't think that's independent. That's not like an accident. That's part of my political philosophy, is that they used to have a term for it in German. It was called mind life. It was a great term. And I've never heard it. I don't hear it anymore because people don't believe in it. They think it's because they think when you deal with the mind, you're no longer doing science, because they just think of like high school psychology. Oh, well, I'm going to feel this if you feel that. They think you're just talking about feelings. But there are actually mental patterns, not physical ones, but mental patterns that are mental, meaning it's not a biological thing that we know of. And those are influenceable. Like a child, it's possible to have a child stop believing in ghosts. You don't have to give them medications, and then the child will be happier at night. So it's not a medical issue. And if I stop thinking about interpersonal conflict in my thoughts, like, oh, John, I'm going to hurt that John, or John's going to hurt me. If I'm able to stop thinking about that, I will be much happier, regardless whether John is or isn't going to hurt me, or I am or I'm not going to hurt him. So maybe we're getting a little far afield. I don't mean to commandeer the the libertarian ethical discussion. So let me turn it back to you, and I'm just arguing for individualistic utility, that the way you live your life impacts your happiness directly, which you probably agree with.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's just, so then maybe we'd have some disagreement on whether you could show that scientifically or prove it in writing, or or what the method would be. In other words, we'd have the same goal but use different methods.
Mhm.
Maybe. Is that what
Yeah.
that would be?
Yeah, I even wrote an article, co-wrote it with Brittany Hunter, called like "How Believing in Socialism Makes You Miserable,"
Right.
and citing Ludwig von Mises, when he talks about sort of like the psychology of anti-capitalism, and just just the philosophy, just the what resentment, especially resentment of capitalists and resentment of the wealthy, um, does to people. That it just resentment and envy makes people miserable, and trying to trying to like ex like ha- trying to move your locus of control to other people in general. Like this is what Leonard Reed really stressed, was that um instead of focusing on self-improvement, getting fixated on other improvement, and and
And
and
essentially it's trying to control other people. I mean, we can say it however we want, but it's saying the problem is you, and I need to find a way to, I need to tense up and get you straightened out.
right,
Then things will be good for me.
right, yeah, and he calls it being a meddler, and he made the point that if there were no meddlers, there would be no socialism. um and being a meddler is just like being a criminal, is just inherently um not it's just inherently like it makes you miserable. And like the saying there, like no rest for the wicked, it's because I think that there are social reasons for that, but then there's also just like the way that we're made, like the way that our like I said, our God-given souls are. And there's just something inherent in like trying to improve, trying to change something that you ultimately don't have any kind of control over. That's inherently frustrating. And focusing on controlling the one thing that you have the most control over, which is yourself, that there's something that's inherently like validating about that. And so yeah, so I don't know if it's like a hard and fast law, but it's definitely a psychological tendency and a tendency of human nature.
Yeah. So my point really then boils down to, if we took what you just said, if I took that and like meddler is, I would call that, to me, that's a moral term. I mean, it's saying you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. It's like a naughty term. You're being a meddler as opposed to being a minder of your own business. To me, but if I took it seriously, said, okay, when I'm trying to control somebody, how does that work? Or when I'm having mental battle with somebody, how do thoughts work? And what's the difference when I do that versus when I don't do that? There has to be some difference. I mean, when I'm in my apartment, like having my favorite beverage or whatever and watching my favorite YouTube channel or whatever, I'm pretty happy. And when I turn to the interpersonal conflict that I was going to have with the person who I thought cheated me, I got unhappy. So the state of science now tells me, Adam, that's only physical and biological. That's the only way you can solve it. That's not what Mises believed. So that's what's been lost from the early 20s and 30s, when the Austrian movement was trying to figure out, it was called the epistemological method. So the epistemological method, it's written, a great book for someone to read about that would be by Arthur Eddington. It's called The Philosophy of Physical Science. It's basically the proposition that you could figure out physical laws through epistemology, through figuring out how the mind works. It's a pretty bold assertion. But Hayek also had famous passages in which he said, essentially, if we could figure out our mental patterns, then we would know all the forms of human conduct, because we can only understand what the structure of our mind allows us to understand. It was reverse engineering. They're saying, if our mind has a certain structure to it, if we understand that structure, then we're going to understand the pattern that everything that happens must happen. It was genius, but I think they didn't succeed in it. There's reasons why I don't want to get into, but so just taking this concept of a meddler, if you really took it seriously, say, okay, well, but name calling aside, let's call it a busybody, this and that. We can call people all sorts of names, but what is the actual action or activity that's being done? And can we say anything about that? Well, if you do this, fine, but here's what you can expect to happen. You can do this, but then you'll have to give up that. So in my way of thinking, the trade-off for what I try to do is I give up control. Control can be valuable. I mean, I could go take that guy to court and get some money. That's valuable, and get justice, whatever, and get him back for what he did. There's good things that I can do that are, pretty cool from my perspective. So, but then what do I give up? A certain kind of mental tranquility. Oh, well, if I go get mental tranquility, now I can't pursue that person, because those two they're mutually exclusive. So that's where I'm going, is that, but how can you show that in a way that's rigorous? And I think the world says, no, Adam, you can't do that, because our philosophy shows that you have biology here, and psychology is kind of wishy-washy. There's no laws of psychology. That's just like a rap session for people to express their feelings. Oh, show me the color blue. How do you feel? Show me the color, all that stuff. That's really, it's kind of pyramid, new age stuff. It doesn't, it's not scientific, but scientific means natural science has to be atomic physics. Has to eventually be bolstered by particle physics and biology. And then when you go to the mental stuff, those departments are declining. I mean, that's just like political science, right? Gender studies, all the mental stuff is over where anything goes. We can say whatever we want. There's no laws. There's no prohibitions, because you can say whatever you want. You can try to prove anything you want. Everybody's feelings are equal. Everything's equal. So they're saying, if you try to go in that way and trying to show mental patterns that aren't biological, you're not going to succeed, because you're going to end up over there in the subjective sciences where anything goes. So you're not going to be able to do scientific mental patterns like mathematics of the mind. That will not succeed. And I don't think it has succeeded so far, that people know about. So they have a point. That just means the challenge is there for someone who thinks that they know what they're doing and thinks they're smart, and who wants to take on a tall order of a challenge, and see if they can solve that puzzle. So that's just my way of saying, what is the best ethical framework upon which to hang the case for liberty? And my answer is individualistic utilitarianism. But what do you say, Dan?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, as well as the nature that results in individual utility, and the God that gave us that nature.
I have no comeback.
Well,
I have no objection.
as always, this is a really invigorating conversation, Adam. Thank you for that. And and I'm sure that these will be subjects that we'll be returning to. I mean, especially as we have people trying to cite religion to justify the war in Iran, and it's important to make sure that we have an understanding of religion that accords with our God-given nature and God-given reality. And so I think that these are good discussions to have, and you're a good person to have them with, Adam.
I feel the same way, Dan. I enjoy our discussions, and um, I feel I have a tendency to kind of like go off on my things, and it's just it's my individualistic orientation that keeps getting me every time.
Well, just
So,
consider yourself in a restaurant where anything goes. You can.
well, I appreciate your patience and your tolerating me to go off a little bit on a tangent, and hopefully I'm contributing something thought provoking or valuable. And thanks for letting me say my piece. I appreciate it very much.
Oh yeah, it's interesting, um, interesting stuff, and it all interrelates. So yeah,
Yeah,
good
and
stuff.
we mentioned earlier in the talk, how when you have a common goal and no or less ulterior motives and conditions of honesty, that's kind of one way that life can work. And I feel we have that to some extent here. Um, uh, my goal, as a libertarian, my goal is to see if I can try to contribute to a libertarian society. And that's my main goal. And I'm sure as a human being, I must have ulterior motives and other goals that are in there. And as a human being, I have different, some level of honesty and dishonesty. I try to be an honest person. I think that's important. But the spirit of our conversation, I think that we're interested in liberty and libertarian thought and libertarians, and I think we're open-minded, and we're not here to destroy things. We're here to try to build something, and we feel strongly about it. And so, like we're that example of the people with this common goal, few ulterior motives, and the conditions of relative honesty as much as we can be that. And then so that's we feel that's a great way to go.
It
And
is.
maybe we can demonstrate that. And by demonstrating it in Leonard Reed style, um, show a slightly different pathway towards interpersonal combat, intellectual or political.
Exactly. Modeling instead of meddling.
Modeling instead of meddling. You propose that as a new slogan?
Yeah.
I'm a modeler, not a meddler. It's Michael Jackson.
Yeah. Hopefully, if only we could model for Twitter, but I don't think Twitter is going to be the model of discourse anytime soon.
Oh, with all the arguments going on there and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Well,
All right.
yep.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Dan.
See you
Till
all
next
next
time.
time.